it's been really cool to see Geno really resurrect his career and become a leader for this team. Again, we talked about that maturity. He is that guy that's in, kind of leading the charge, that's, giving the pep talks, all that good stuff. He's been a real consummate pro and leader here in his time in Seattle.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Buffalo Plus YouTube channel presented by Connors and Ferris. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Hey, we've got a special guest with us, somebody that I have known. You guys are going to get to know Niko Tamurian, who is sports anchor, sports director at KOMO in Seattle, an iconic station in the country, former Syracuse sports anchor and reporter. Niko, welcome to Buffalo Plus.
This is a full circle moment because, Mike, I've looked up to you for a long time, and you've had this effect, even if it's not direct, on so many sports anchors out there. We learned by you showing the way, so I'm not here without your example. So this is really cool for me to be on Buffalo Plus, which I'm a huge fan of course, being an upstate New York native.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, we cover a lot of Syracuse basketball together back in the day when you were here, and now you're out there in Seattle covering this Seahawks team. From afar, which is the way most Bills fans have seen them, right? You know about the Seahawks. You know the Bills are going out there now this week. Man, they start out 3-0. Then they lose 3 in a row. They lose at home to the Giants. But then they go down to Atlanta, a talented Atlanta team, and they blow them out. Where is this team right now?
And Mike McDonald, the new head coach, will be the first to tell you they're still figuring out who they are. And I think the big part of that, okay, so when I look at that 3-0 start, it was the Broncos, Bo Nix's first start. He was still finding his way. Certainly he's been better ever since. They needed overtime to beat a Patriots team that, as we've seen, is struggling. And then, of course, they handled the Dolphins here in Seattle. It was the Dolphins team after the 2 injuries suffered against the Bills. So you can almost look at the opponent. I look at it as the next game after that was that Monday night game with the Lions, which was kind of a shootout, 42-29. I think the Lions exposed something. And then after that, the Seahawks had a really rapid fire. Okay, that was a Monday game. That Giants game you mentioned was the following week. Then they had a Thursday game, so just 3 days after, against the Niners here. And the Niners have had their numbers. Seahawks haven't beaten the 49ers since 2021. So I almost look at it as this team was figuring themselves out. The 3-0 start, partly a product of who they were playing. But now, okay, you look at this Atlanta game, they had what Mike McDonald called a mini bye. It wasn't a bye, but it was maybe 2 or 3 extra days playing on Thursday against the Niners. And I think that gave them the necessary time to adjust to whatever the Lions figured out, whatever the Giants exploited. And then, of course, the Niners did as well. I think that gave them a little bit of time because if Mike McDonald, we've learned one thing so far. He's kind of a scientist out there. That was the reputation he got in Baltimore. Just give him a little time, and I think they figured it out. Does it translate to Sunday's matchup with the Bills? We're going to find out. Bills are a little bit different caliber, I think, than the Falcons. But I think that's what we saw is they figured things out. And this is going to be an ever-evolving thing. I think they're going to have some win streaks. I think they're going to have some losing streaks. And they're going to be right there in the playoff conversation, partly because the NFC West is kind of down right now at the moment.
Yeah, with a lot of the teams not doing what people would have expected. We're going to get back to McDonald in a minute. Yes. I want to ask you about Geno. And I think of Geno, I mean, he came to the Jets when the Bills had E.J. Manuel. Like, that guy has been around. And a lot of Bills fans probably would think of Geno Smith, not that they don't see him, but they think of Geno Smith more as that guy who was with the Jets. And there are failed Jets quarterbacks all over the NFL. And here he is out in Seattle, and he's putting up numbers. I mean, they're the highest scoring team in the league. He can throw the ball. He rejuvenated his career. What's it been like to have this version of Geno Smith in Seattle?
It's been really unique. I mean, my first year covering the team was Russell's last year. And, they make the trade. And I remember thinking that whole time after they traded Russell Wilson, okay, they're going to draft a quarterback. That passes. Okay, well, they're going to trade or sign somebody. And they didn't. And they were content to roll with Geno Smith and Drew Lockett. A lot of people thought they were crazy. And Geno's proven him wrong. And he has this little saying. He says, I still haven't written back. The thing with Geno, I think maturity has helped him quite a bit. He's even said he's a much older, much wiser guy than we saw with the New York Jets when he was first drafted and even backing up Eli. But he also says that experience of backing up Eli Manning, backing up Phillip Rivers, and then Russell Wilson really helped him become the quarterback that he is right now. And Mike, I'm going to be honest with you. He would be putting up much better numbers and much more prolific numbers if he actually had an offensive line that could block for him. Yes, the Seahawks have some injuries, but the Seahawks offensive line, and this is the key thing I'm watching in this matchup, is so subpar that they started a 6th round draft pick the other day, and he played really well. Michael Jarrell, he was a Division II guy last year. They signed, I know this will mean something to your audience, they signed Jason Peters off the street at 42 years old. And we all love JP, right? He's a future Hall of Famer, but that kind of speaks to the situation. And yet, despite all of that, the injuries, the need at several spots on the line, despite all that, he's putting up the numbers that we were just talking about a minute ago. When he has time, he's surgical. When he has time, he can really make quick relatively decisions and use DK Metcalf to the fullest of having a freak athlete like that running around in the secondary. But again, he hasn't had that much time. Certainly in a lot of these games, the Giants were in the backfield constantly, same with the Lions. But it's been really cool to see, to really kind of bring this back and answer your question. It's been really cool to see Geno really resurrect his career and become a leader for this team. Again, we talked about that maturity. He is that guy that's in, kind of leading the charge, that's, giving the pep talks, all that good stuff. He's been a real consummate pro and leader here in his time in Seattle. And it's been cool to see that progression in his career.
Yeah. When you see players, they have the ability. Him coming out of West Virginia, talented guy, goes to the Jets. A lot is put on him. And you see other players a little younger, but also in that second phase of their career. Even a Jared Goff, who went to a Super Bowl, much better player now than he was then with a different team. We see Sam Darnold in Minnesota. Obviously, Geno's got a few more miles on him. He's been around a little bit longer. But I think it's pretty obvious when you watch him throw the football and you see him lead a team that talent has always been there. It is something where it sometimes takes guys a little longer. And to your point, who would have thought Geno would be still starting and playing in the league this long?
And the talk is he's really, they're working on an extension. They signed him to a 3-year deal after he took him to the playoffs in 2022. This is year 2 of that. And it looks like they're trying to work on some kind of extension. Certainly age becomes a factor in any of those talks, but who would have thought it, right? Yeah. And I think I'm a big believer in everything you just said, that maybe not the case with every quarterback, but the Darnolds of the world, even a Baker Mayfield, how he was just kind of kicked out of Cleveland. Look what he's doing. I think we put so much on these rookie quarterbacks, and sometimes it takes a little while. The NFL is a tough place, and the quarterback's the hardest position. Sometimes it takes a few years, and Geno's proof of that, maybe he would have liked to have been a starter again sooner. There was an 8-year gap between full-time starter with New York and then taking over after Russell Wilson was traded. But it's proof that you give these guys a little time, and certainly the right situation. I mean, anybody who's drafted to the way the Jets used to be, or the Carolina Panthers today, is pretty much in trouble. But yeah, and it's been really cool to see. And what's really interesting for me is, when Russell Wilson struggled after being traded, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, it's Pete Carroll. His system it maybe fosters a quarterback to be better than maybe what they are. But here's Geno in a whole new regime, and he's putting up the best numbers he has. So it's been really cool to see that he can do it in different staffs, different schemes, so to speak.
Let's talk about the wide receivers. Now, we're going to start with DK Metcalf. And full disclosure, we're recording this on Monday afternoon. We saw that he got hurt on Sunday.
He can do it all. So if he can't go, it's a huge loss. If he can go, the Seahawks are operating at full capacity, because it opens things up for your other talented receivers. Jackson Smith and Jigba was their 1st-round pick out of Ohio State in 2023. He's now coming into his own. Tyler Lockett's been with the Seahawks since he was drafted in 2015. They call him Toe Tap Tyler out here because he's famous for making those sideline catches. And they've got another young guy, Jake Bobo, who was undrafted out of UCLA, and he has been a revelation. He's 6'4". He's got a big body. You won't see him as much as the other 3 guys, but he can make some really big-time catches. And the point here is that DK opens everything up for those guys. Anytime you look at the stat sheet and maybe Tyler Lockett or Jackson Smith and Jigba has 100 yards, well, it's probably because DK was occupying a Jalen Ramsey or a Pat Surtain or somebody like that, or at least some of the safeties out there. So he's everything. And if he's out, it completely changes the game as far as it makes the Bills' defensive coordinator's job a lot easier in that respect.
Yeah, and I think of a guy like Lockett, feel like he's 45 years old. It feels like he's been around forever. I also feel like he's been one of the most underrated players in the NFL for what he's done in Seattle. He just always seems to make plays.
We love him. Did you know, Mike, he has his real estate license? He went and got that in the off season. So he's like selling houses around Seattle in the
Oh,
off season,
wow.
like go hum, and even in his home state of Texas as well. He does it. But yeah, Tyler's like kind of that ambassador of the franchise, if you will. Always doing the press conferences, always doing the stuff out in the community. And listen, after all these years since the season, he can still ball. I don't know how many more years he's going to do it, just because he does have all those outside football endeavors he likes. But yeah, you nailed it. He's so underrated, and DK commands the attention, rightfully so. But I mean, yeah, Lockett is a guy that can hurt you in so many different ways too.
Now let's get back to Walker. First of all, that catch was incredible.
Yeah.
And is that, I mean, I think of him, I mean, he's put up good numbers in the backfield, and I think of him more that way. But is he being involved in more into the passing game, or was that more of an exception?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely is, and he's caught a couple touchdowns before. But I think that you primarily, one thing, even though you have a new regime, new offensive coordinator, and all that sort of thing, is that they still want to run the ball first, just like Pete Carroll wanted to do. And so they're always going to try and do that with Kenneth Walker, and he's the guy. I mean, they have another second-round pick they took the following year, Zach Charbonnet. He'll get some touches, but he's, I mean, far and away, the second back here. But Kenneth can do it all, and they almost do it as like a change of pace to kind of keep you honest. But it's more than just keeping you honest, because like you said, you see that catch the other day. And that's been a really interesting thing, because you have a new offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, who was actually the offensive coordinator for the Washington Huskies out here last year. But the question was, okay, he had never done this at the NFL level. He's always a college guy, and he was going to go with Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, but he didn't want to go to Alabama. And then Mike McDonald offered him this job, so he stayed in Seattle. But we were wondering how much different this offense would be, and I think that's another facet of it. He's trying. Grubb's big thing is, you guys watch your film, and I know you guys do such an awesome job of that, and he's told me this, one-on-one chat we had. What he's trying to do is run as many different plays out of a same formation. In other words, like when the Bills sit down to do film study this week, he wants it to be like, so they don't know what play's coming, because they can run 10 plays. I'm just spitballing a number out of that formation right there. And that's what he tries to do, is you don't quite know what to expect. And that's a product of seeing K9 come out of the backfield and catch a pass, when maybe in that formation, you're looking over the middle to DK or up top to Tyler or JSN. So it's been really cool. They've used Kenneth, and he missed a couple games earlier this year, but no ill effects. And listen, 69 yards on the ground, the touchdown through the air, all while playing with the flu on his birthday, and that win over the Falcons, Mike.
Wow. Yeah, impressive. That was a big win. Let's get to McDonald as we talk about the defense. Your offense ranked, basically number one in points, near the top in all the top categories. Defense, 19th in points, 22nd in yards. Mike McDonald coming over as the head coach. What has the defense been like? And you talk about finding an identity. Are they still looking for that on the defensive side too?
I think so. They've faced a lot of injuries. That loss to the Lions when Detroit put up 42 points, they were missing all four of their starting defensive linemen. I mean, it was kind of crazy to think about that. The interior and some of the ends, a couple linebackers too. They've been without their star corner, Reek Woolen, who was a revelation. He's a 5th round pick a couple years ago. He's 6'4", but he runs a 4.240. Like, he's the real deal. So they've actually really been ravaged by injuries. But Mike is quick to say that's not an excuse. Everybody in the NFL has injuries. I think they're still, like we said a minute ago, they're still evolving. They're still figuring things out. Certainly, the Lions have a really good offense, but then again, you let the Giants and Daniel Jones kind of move the ball at will. Granted, there were still injuries there, but I will say, between that Niners game and the 10 days or so before they played the Falcons, a lot of guys got healthy. They got some guys back on the defensive line. And the hope is, which we won't know until we play the Bills, right? But the hope here in Seattle, of course, is that, okay, these guys are healthy. And that's maybe why we saw them limit, the Falcons to just 14 points and kind of, after the first half, really locked them down. I mean, we saw in the first half of that game, Bijan Robinson, as he tends to do, had a really good start. And then in the second half, there was nothing there for this team. And the hope is, okay, maybe these guys have their legs back under them. And certainly they're much more healthy than they've been in maybe a month, to be honest with you. So that's the hope. What's really cool about McDonald is you'd never know it, that Pete Carroll, you would think, is the old school coach, 72 when he retired. Yet he was very new school, very loose, free flowing. There was always music playing at the facilities. You'd be liable to go there for the weekly press conferences, and Pete would just fly by you on a scooter in the hallway. It was a really cool environment. And I'm not saying Mike isn't it, because Mike is a great guy. Love talking to him, but he's different. He may be the youngest NFL head coach at 37, but he's got the old school mentality about him. He's got this, we're disciplined and we're going to hold people accountable. Not that Pete didn't, but he's got more of the old school approach. And it's kind of unique that you have that opposite approach, I suppose. But yeah, I think they may have figured something out. Again, different animal playing against the Bills offense with a guy like Josh, but the hope in Seattle, at least, is what we saw in the second half against the Falcons, is finally seeing guys healthy, not playing 3 games in 10 days like they did in 3 losses, and maybe finding their footing going forward.
I got to ask you about a former Bill who's there, because Bills fans are going to notice Tyrel Dodson and how he's doing. You know, in Buffalo, he was a special teams guy, and then they needed him to play. And he actually, I thought, played pretty well. And I think he started at times, it was back and forth, and they've moved on. They have Terrell Bernard. They drafted Dorian Williams. They went that way. What's Dodson been like for this defense?
First of all, how fun is he to talk to, right?
Yeah, he's a talker. Yep.
Yeah, he's become quickly a leader on that defensive side of the ball, which is cool to see because, like you mentioned, he kind of played his way into this new role and this new contract starting for the Seahawks and all that sort of thing. And he's been huge for them because they've had injuries elsewhere in the offense. Another guy you're probably familiar with, Jerome Baker, came over from the Dolphins. He was hurt for a lot of the early season. So it was Dodson that was really there making some key plays. And again, how fun is it? He's always talking to the other team. He's a real character leader, guys, you already know, but he's been huge. Like, I can't overstate how important he's been for a defense that, like we just mentioned, has really been ravaged by injuries, but he's taken on a leadership role for a team that's pretty young. You're starting 2 of your edges and 1 of your defensive tackles are all in their first 3 years in the league. Your 2 starting corners are either in their 2nd or 3rd year. So this is a really young defensive unit. Guys like Dotson and the former Giant Julian Love in the secondary have been huge in their leadership roles to kind of get this thing together. And for what, again, most people here in the Pacific Northwest think and hope could be a really special second half of the season, even if the schedule is going to be difficult.
Yeah, I want to get back to the coach, too, because you were talking about it. The youngest coach replacing the oldest coach. Fans certainly had a lot of affinity for Pete, but there is a point where maybe just time sort of runs out on a coach with a fan base. Where are they with McDonald, and how much does it have to do with they're used to Pete? This is the way Pete did it. Everybody knew Pete. And now you got this young guy doing it a little differently.
I think that's certainly what you're seeing, Mike. I mean, Pete was here 14 years, brought the Seahawks the best era of maybe sports in the city, but certainly with this franchise. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were upset when Pete got let go. And certainly they tried to play it off at first like it was a mutual thing. But then Pete went on local radio the next day or two. It was like, yeah, no, I didn't really want to go, And they tried to play it that way because they knew how much people loved Pete, and they still love Pete. There was an NBA preseason game here the last week, and there's Pete Carroll sitting courtside, and they bring him up on the big screen, and that might have been the loudest cheer of the night for a city that's really trying to get their Sonics back here and cheering for anything like that. But yeah, so that's definitely what you're seeing. I think people like McDonald. He's a really likable guy. I just think they're trying to figure out what's going on. So when they start 3-0, naturally everybody's like, oh yeah, this has been great. And then you lose 3 in a row. And in our version of this show we do on our KOMO News YouTube page, all the comments are bring back Pete, that sort of thing. He's finding his way. It's again 37 years old. I find it funny. Normally when we talk about people with teams having children, him and his wife are expecting their first baby. You don't often see a head coach doing that in the middle of the season. I think the due date sometime in December. So you don't often see that. Maybe worry about a coach having to be out for a day or two in the regular season, but that's where Mike is. My gathering, and we've been able to do a couple one-on-one talks with him. I really think he's a great dude, but he also, when you talk to him, he's just so cerebral. Like there's always it feels like 8 things going on in his head that he's formulating an answer to. And maybe he doesn't have that same exact charisma that Pete Carroll has, who does in the NFL coaching world. But there's a reason his defenses in Baltimore are so successful. And I think the more these guys here in Seattle get used to it, and maybe even going forward when they're able to draft more players or sign more guys to help out, I think it's going to be a really special unit because you kind of see the way he adjusts mid games. One of the things we maybe saw the last couple of years, the Seahawks would have a big lead at halftime, and then they would just go flat in the second half because they weren't able to maybe adjust as much as you'd like to see. But that's not an issue with Mike McDonald. He's just so in the zone, so cerebral about it. I keep using that word, but that's really the first thing that comes away. The players call him a scientist. I used that word earlier. It came from a lot of the Seahawks players. That's the kind of coach you get in Mike McDonald. Not going to see a ton of emotion on the sideline where you see Pete jumping, chewing the gum, throwing the flag, all that stuff. You're not going to see that with Mike, but he's, again, I think a really great coach, really effective coach. And maybe, just like we talked about some of these first-year quarterbacks, it's going to take some time. I see this Seahawks team as somewhere in the 9-8, 10-7 range when it's all said and done. But maybe in the next couple of years, you're talking about seeing where they were a decade ago, where you're always competing in the NFC West, winning 11, 12 games, something of that sort.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about the difference between the coaches. Obviously, there's a major age difference. But in Buffalo, we went from Rex Ryan to Sean McDermott, who are maybe more dislike each other. Not dislike, they don't dislike each other, but not the same than even Pete Carroll and McDonald. I mean, Rex is Rex and Sean is Sean. It is a very big culture change in Buffalo when they made that move. Speaking of Buffalo and coaches, Leslie Frazier is an assistant head coach in Seattle. Yes. I don't know how often, we used to get to talk to him when he was defensive coordinator. Leslie, I think one of the nicest men in the NFL, one of the most respected people. Obviously, when you have a younger head coach, it's great to have somebody like that. What role do you really see him have? Have you gotten a chance to talk to him? Because I know there's not normal media for somebody in that position.
Right. He doesn't do normal media, but you can see it. He is very much like the wise counsel to Mike McDonald. And they say it as much, like he's so valuable to this organization, especially when Mike was kind of going through everything for a first time, whether it's, rookie mini camp, whether it's actual, OTAs, all the stuff that goes through the summer, so to speak, and preparing for eventually getting to training camp and all that. I think Leslie was key in that regard. I think Mike has, and certainly, is playing out the vision he has in this, and it's a work in progress. And there's some exclamation points like we saw against the Falcons, but I think it's Leslie you can almost see it, like the old hat in the room, and we get to talk to him sidebar, we get those, whatever it is, 2 minutes of seeing Seahawks practice. Yeah. He's the one who's coming over and just, saying hi, chopping it up for a minute. So he very much has that elder statesman role here. And it couldn't be more important because, again, it's not just Mike McDonald, this young head coach. We talked about Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, first time doing this in the NFL. Aiden Dirty, the defensive coordinator. Mike McDonald calls the plays, but Dirty is relatively new. He did some work with the Cowboys in a similar role. So you kind of have a lot of guys that may be scientists, may have these great schemes, but they're inexperienced. And maybe that isn't as much of an issue for these guys. But when you have that, certainly Leslie Frazier, so crucial, just being there to guide things along without question.
All right. Final 2 questions about the games in Seattle. 1 would be about the actual game. 2 would be Bills fans making the trip, because this is one of those places that we don't get to go to very often. And I think a lot of fans may have put it on their list of places to go. So let's start with the atmosphere. The 12th man. I mean, I've been there. Incredible place to see a game. Very loud. What is it like to experience that, especially in a tight game, especially, maybe against rivals or one of the night games? If fans are out there or even watching, what are they going to experience?
Mike, I used to think the Carrier Dome, or what is the JMA Wireless Dome, was loud until I got to cover some games at Lumen Field. And that's not a disrespect to the Dome and SU. It's loud. But it's just, you've been to Lumen. It's a different animal there. I'll give you a quick recent story to kind of summarize the atmosphere and how exciting and how loud it is. So the World Cup coming to North America in 2026, Seattle is one of the host cities. The president of FIFA, who has probably been to thousands of stadiums around the world, right, for different World Cups and things like that, they had him in town for a Seahawks game, and it was the Niners game, and he was blown away by how loud it was. He's like, I can't believe this place. And yeah, some of that is PR. He's talking to Seattle media. I understand that. But I think it speaks volumes to the atmosphere you have at Lumen. For the Bills fans that are traveling here, you're going to come out here and be like, oh, here's Seattle. It's raining. It's supposed to be, I think, in the 50s and raining. I promise you, we don't get a drop of rain from like May to September. It's kind of weird. You don't think that in Seattle, but it's going to be, but there's something about that misty rain we get here on a Sunday with that crowd being loud. It kind of just all adds to the ambiance of Lumen Field and that environment. It's a really cool place to check out a game. I really enjoy it. And I think that Bills fans, that whether they're transplants from upstate New York like I am, or whether they're fans that are coming to the Pacific Northwest, they're really going to love the atmosphere of the game. And I guess you're hoping that you're probably not as loud there because the Bills quiet the crowd. But maybe enjoy those first few minutes when it's going to be very loud. It's going to be really, when that hawk, they actually have a hawk that flies out of the tunnel, and then the players come out. It's a really cool thing. Yeah, I mean, every NFL atmosphere, I suppose, is really awesome, but I don't know if it's the structure of the stadium and the way it keeps sound in. We all remember Marshawn Lynch's big run in 2011 that actually registered an earthquake, like a 3.0 or something like that. Like that's how loud and raucous it gets at this place. So cool to check out a game.
Oh yeah, we know Marshawn.
Yes, you do.
And when they're out there, it's only a couple of days, and it's, you know, I always tell people when they go somewhere and they're like, "That's a touristy thing to do." You're a tourist. If you've never been to Seattle, you're a tourist. So where do they go?
Yeah, first of all, you gotta have some seafood. The seafood here is unbelievable. And listen, Wegmans has some great seafood. We're not trying to discredit, but the first time I had like scallops or crab or something, I was like, oh my God, this is like from a different planet. Cause they probably caught it that morning in Puget Sound, a stone's throw away from Lumen Field. So make sure you get some good seafood. A lot of things I would always say, I mean, the Space Needle is our iconic structure. Our station at KOMO is literally right next to it. In fact, I'm looking at it behind your camera, which is kind of cool. The only thing about that is if it's rainy, you don't get to see all the mountains. That's the one thing about it. It's supposed to be cloudy and rainy this weekend. When it's sunny, it's a different animal here. You can see Mount Rainier, you can see Mount Baker, which are these like iconic. I mean, it's distracted driving when you're on the highway and all of a sudden there's big mountains right in front of you. But I think you should still check out the Space Needle. Our waterfront is a really cool spot. And again, I think the one thing that's weatherproof is having some of the seafood. And depending on when you're coming out, the Kraken plays Thursday night. I know got a lot of Sabres fans there, and unfortunately it's not the Sabres they're playing Winnipeg. But check out Climate Pledge Arena and understand that it's where hopefully in the next couple of years the Seattle Supersonics are going to return to. And there's a lot of stuff in the periphery as well. Again, weather permitting, you can go a half hour north of Seattle and take a cruise, and they guarantee you're going to see orca whales in the wild, the killer whales. So I remember seeing them at Marineland when I was a kid, but it was different to see them out here in the wild. So there's a lot of cool stuff to do. Depending on when you guys are coming in and making sure we're going to get a nice dinner and some seafood, Mike. But Seattle's an awesome place. I love upstate New York so much, but my wife and I fell in love with it here, and that's why we're here. It's a really cool and beautiful place, and I think Bills fans will really enjoy themselves.
Awesome. Let everybody know where they can follow you to know what's going on with the game this week, and people who just want to keep track of what you got going, especially people from upstate or Western New York who know of you from your time in Syracuse.
Yeah, so at Niko Tamurian, when NikoTamurian, we'll spell it out for everybody. KOMO-News.com is probably the easiest. That's where we're posting all of our preview articles, our little preview chats that we'll do, and certainly as we get closer to game day, the Wednesday, we'll have more on what coaches are saying, what Geno's saying, all that stuff there. And it's going to be a fun one. This will be the one time, Mike, this entire season that I'll go on the Seattle airwaves and predict Buffalo winning, because I just think they're that dynamic. I'm not just trying to get the rise from Buffalo plus awesome loyal audience. I think this will be a really, really difficult challenge for the Seahawks, but we'll be talking about that. And I just can't thank you enough for having me on, man. This was a blast.
Well, this is great insight on the Seahawks and Seattle and getting ready for the seafood. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and we look forward to it. And we'll see you out there this week.
Oh, I can't wait, Mike. I can't wait to see you guys.
All right, great. Niko Tamurian from KOMO in Seattle. You can follow him. He gave you all of the places to follow him on social media and on the air. And certainly we'll be looking forward to seeing what goes on this weekend in Seattle. That's going to do it for us. Again, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you the next time on the Buffalo Plus channel on YouTube, presented by Connors and Ferris.